all of us have the same basic questions about life
Yes.
without even recognizing it.
Yes. Worldviews actually drive or define what a culture is. It's really about raising up people, teaching them that this is how you're going to act, how you're going to perceive the world.
Truth can only be defined objectively by the Bible.
It's important to be able to identify where your values lie,
Yeah.
because that will determine what your practice will be.
But before we get into that, if you're watching on Spotify, go ahead and follow the show and drop a rating.
If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And if you're on Facebook, make sure to follow my page, Joyce Pring, for updates and extra content. All right, let's get into it. Attorney Arrow, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Now, we'll be talking about something today na I feel like I constantly talk about here on the podcast, but we've never truly defined it in the most proper way, which is worldview. Ano nga bang ibig sabihin ng worldview? You know, one of the things na we constantly say here on the podcast is kapag growing up ka, you know, you're learning about who you are, you're learning to make relationships, build relationships, learn about the world. The most important thing about you is your worldview, or the lens through which you perceive the world, because that is going to shape everything about who you are and all the decisions that you make. But what is the definition talaga of worldview, and how can we look at it?
Actually, you've defined it the way that you've discussed it. It's really literally how you see the world. If we become strict about it in the academic setting, it's actually focused more on how you perceive the world in general. So it is, if I could explain it even more plainly, it's a map or a model of how you play out your reality here in the world. And it involves, it's a basket of so many things. Your ideas, values, beliefs, emotions. It drives behavior, pero it's just a map. Merong idiosyncrasies or merong technicalities that can actually drive how you actually act in the world, but it drives everything that you do. It's a map.
Yeah.
So it's good to see worldview in that lens, because to be honest, worldview is often confused with a lot of things, like culture, values, beliefs. It's all of that. Actually, based on my background as an anthro major, it's actually been discussed that worldviews actually drive or define what a culture is. Kung ano yung worldview, or what is the worldview of a certain type of group or a people group, that is what defines their culture. That is how they educate their kids. That's how they raise them. Because culture really, if you look right down to it, it's really about raising up people, teaching them that this is how you're going to act, how you're going to perceive the world, and you know, everything.
And that's why it's so important, right?
Yes.
Do you sometimes hear people say na wala naman akong worldview eh?
Actually, that's a myth. Lahat tayo may worldview. Even your that statement na wala akong worldview is a worldview.
It's a worldview, yeah.
And that's what's weird about it, because even the individualistic kind of behavior, the I am my own person, I am my own island, I don't need a family, I don't need to identify with any single group, that individualistic lens is a worldview. And some people can stick to it, some people don't. But if there's one thing that's very clear about Philippine culture, to be more specific about it, we are a people group na talagang focused on community.
Yeah.
Nothing is private. Everything is almost public. Yeah.
To a certain degree that is so difficult to swallow because it's really true, no? Yeah. Okay, so worldview is the way through which we perceive the world. It is a smorgasbord of our culture, our preferences, our emotions, as you mentioned. And you say that it's important because our worldview shapes the way that we raise up children, the way that we run countries. From your studies, diba? You major mas anthropology. How has worldviews changed the world that we live in right now?
Yeah. Siguro let's use a specific worldview. For example, Asian cultures or Filipino culture in general, we are lined up in that category of fatalistic cultures.
Can you explain that to
like,
us?
Bahala na culture, for example, that can be perceived either positively or negatively, meaning that you will allow the universe, or you will allow your faith, whoever you believe in,
Mm-hmm.
to just handle the situation. And that can be seen as a positive or a negative thing.
Yeah.
Because for some, that puts them into a point where they just do not act. They allow an invisible force to just parang wala ng agency on their part. Or on the other end,
Ah.
if it can also be positive, na
Mhm.
bahala na, but there's also faith in that
Mhm.
in that process or in that aspect. So it's changed cultures, it's driven cultures because for example, disaster resilience in my field of study is a big thing here, a big deal here in the Philippines. Some have said na yung resiliency narrative dito sa Pilipinas is something that we should abandon already.
Mhm.
Kasi parang alam naman yan in the flood control narrative, right?
Yeah.
Na parang we want to say na oh, we're just okay with what's happening. It makes us
Mm.
stronger Filipinos whenever
We're
we encounter.
resilient. Kaya
We're
natin
resilient.
yan.
But the solutions, it give, because you leave it up to this is the situation, I just have to deal with it. The solutions are
Yeah.
never built or are never even offered at the table. Kasi may ganong mentality.
Yeah.
That worldview na, ay, bahala na.
Mhm.
Bahala na. It's always been like that. Corruption is so systemic. Hindi na natin mabuburayan. Let's just stop there.
Yeah. So, from your studies, what are the different worldviews? Obviously, we can't talk about everything, right? But can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit more about the more common worldviews that you see at play currently now in our culture in different societies, and how they, you would say, they affect the country or the community of people that
Yeah.
apply these worldviews?
Okay, so I already mentioned yung bahala na mentality.
Mm-hmm.
There are also the I've also mentioned in passing yung corruption is systemic. Wala na tayong magagawa dyan. Or even that phrase, no? Because what thing about worldviews is it also is connected to language. Even the way that
Mm.
feeling natin our phrases, yung mga common phrases that we use, na wala na tayong magagawa dyan. Or wala, yung mga politiko na lang yung bahala dyan.
Mhm.
Or pang matalino yan. That in itself is also a worldview. That's a common worldview. Let's go to that, yung pang matalino yan, na we feel like the role of a normal citizen in nation building, it's reserved for people who are educated. It's reserved for people who are in power. And wala siya dun sa people who are quote-unquote normal tax-paying citizens. What other yeah, I mean, yun. We usually think that we do not play a role because there are people more suited to doing this job.
So is, let's say, an individualistic perception of life, is that a worldview?
Yes.
Like everything revolves around me?
Yes.
Okay.
I think a lot of Gen Zs right now have that kind of narrative. Yung retiring at a certain age, at an early age,
Mhm.
and also even yung notion na I can make it without with cutting off people in my life, especially
Yeah.
my family. Even the worldview that if it doesn't serve you, you've heard this a lot on TikTok. If it doesn't serve you, let it go or
Yeah.
cut it off.
Or happiness is the ultimate goal. That's a
Yes,
worldview also.
That's a worldview.
Mm.
Look at speech. Look at how people are talking right now in social media. Those are reflections of their worldview. And in fact, can be a worldview in and of itself.
So were worldviews created because of, wow, existential naman nung tanong ko sa utak ko. Were worldviews created because of life's biggest questions, would you say? Like, it's a natural thing, right, as human beings to then follow a certain worldview because you have these questions of, how do I differentiate between good and evil? Why am I here? What happens to me after I die? What's the purpose of life? Do you think that worldviews existed because of that?
Yes. Actually, going back tayo sa definition, actually one of the earliest, parang you're saying existential, right?
Yeah.
One of the earliest people who coined the term worldview is Immanuel Kant.
Ah.
In fact, the way I cannot pronounce it, look it up.
Yes,
Immanuel Kant.
okay.
The way that he defined worldview is it's finding your place in the cosmos or in the universe. And you're right. It's our way of making sense of the world. That's our worldview.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we're searching for something higher than us,
Yeah.
or something that controls us, or something that drives us. And alam natin na sometimes we cannot derive that from ourselves lang talaga.
Yeah.
We derive it from something else, from some other persons,
Mhm.
or again, a higher being,
Yeah.
not just ourselves.
The reason why I'm asking that is because we have to first ask that question. Like,
Mm.
why do we say, kanina we said off the bat, that everybody has a worldview?
Mm.
And the reason why all of us have a worldview is because all of us have the same basic questions about
Life,
life
yes.
without even recognizing it.
Yes, yes.
We don't even recognize it, but we ask these things to ourselves, to the world, to God, to our communities.
Mm-mm.
Why am I here? Where did I come from? What happens to me after I die? How do I differentiate between good and evil? What is my purpose in life?
Yeah.
Right? So these are important questions that people ask. And I think the reason why many of us, I was one of those people, who are miserable, were miserable, is because we try to answer these questions with a worldview that cannot suffice. And that's what leads me to our topic for today, which is Christianity as the worldview that answers life's biggest questions.
Yes.
In your own experience, how has Christianity answered those questions?
Yeah. So, as we know, Christianity is a worldview. And me meeting Christ at a point in my life where I was having that questions even at a young age.
Hmm.
We were discussing earlier, right before this podcast, that I was a voracious reader.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I perhaps was reading stuff beyond the ata kid friendly. Yung mga binabasa ko. Because, classics. I
Mm-hmm.
was reading War of the
Yeah.
Worlds, A Time Machine, medyo leaning on
Dystopian.
dystopian. So I was reading those kinds of novels, the
Yeah.
classics, and it didn't really make sense to me what these things were, because probably I was a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old.
A 7-year-old reading
Yeah,
that. Oh my
yes.
goodness.
And growing up, I grew up in a Christian household. Um, some say it would be easy or natural for you to be a Christian and to form your own values or worldview. I would actually argue that it's difficult.
Is it really more
Yes,
difficult?
yes, because you think that your identity is that,
Mm.
but of course, there's that voice inside of you saying that, hey, diba, I am my own person. I can carve out my space, my role in this. Kumbaga, my personality cannot just be what my parents are.
Yeah.
And that's our inner kid rebelling.
Mm.
And I think that's how it was for my faith experience. I was trying to make sense of me being, I wasn't even a pastor's kid then, but I felt like I was, because I was day in, day out, whole day church kid.
Yeah.
And I think Christianity as a worldview really shaped me to who I am today, because I don't work as an anthropologist. I work as a lawyer,
Yeah.
where morality and your sense of self is very important,
Mm.
because you work for the law, you work for justice. It's important to be able to identify where your values lie,
Yeah.
because that will determine what your practice will be.
So everything, I mean, the way that you define these things talaga will affect every decision that you make in your life, right? I remember I did have an existential crisis when I was 25 years old, and I think that's when my depression really took an almost deadly turn,
Yeah.
when I couldn't find. So just as a background, I think a lot of people who listen to the podcast know this naman. I come from a family that wasn't well off. It was a broken family. I didn't get education kasi nga uh, scholar ako nung high school, tapos I had to work na when I got to college, and then I started working early in showbiz, and I always thought that if I found stability, which was I'll create my own life, I'll have my own place, I'll buy my own car, I'll take care of myself, then I will be happy and satisfied.
Laid out na.
Yeah, laid out na yung plan ko.
Oh.
And because that's my personality, I really worked hard, and I did that. From 18 until 23 years old, I worked 6 or 7 different jobs in showbiz, doing radio, TV, events, and things like that. To the point that when I was 23, I got everything. I got the condo, I got my car, I got to travel, I got my money, I got the stability that I was aiming for. And yet, I was even more depressed at that time than when I started out this journey, which made me question, what's the point? What's the point in all of
Yes,
this?
yes.
Ganon. Na anong point nito? Anong
Yeah.
point ng buhay ko? Okay, so ito pala yung pinnacle. Okay, there's nothing here.
Yes.
And then, I did have an encounter with God when I was younger, and I was literally just desperate, and I was just like, okay, maybe God can help.
Yeah.
Maybe the Bible can offer me something, because I did everything right, quote unquote, but it's still empty. And so that's when I realized that Christianity offers the answers to these questions that I have, which is truth can only be defined objectively by the Bible.
Yes.
That morality can only be defined objectively because there is a just God that lives outside of this,
Yes.
that could tell you this is right and this is wrong.
Because as discussed earlier, a worldview is a map.
Mm.
And I guess in our experimental stages or growing up, we try out these models.
Yeah.
Diba ang joke ng generation natin is, oh, we all had an emo face. We all had a face
I
where...
love how you broke out in the
I know.
song with me.
Diba. We thought that, for the lack of a better term, these attention-seeking behaviors in the
Yeah.
emo realm of thought would actually make us feel belong.
Yeah.
May sense of belonging, kumbaga. Or sometimes, ako, yung phase na, yung mga emo kids daw ngayon, naging K-pop fans na rin. Nakakala natin, hindi lang K-pop even yung mga famous artists na parang, we find our identity in fandoms.
Yeah.
We find our identity
You're
in
belonging.
in belonging. Kasi, nagsasabi naman sila ng inspirational things that
Yeah.
that we feel, it can help motivate me because, hey, look, they work hard. But again, as we were discussing earlier with your testimony, and with the definition of what a worldview is, it's a map. There is no map that is actually more definite and more transformative than the scripture itself. You would realize that all of these things, they sound good. They're sound bites.
Yeah.
They feel good, even. But for something that is definite, something that is sure, I've only found that in scripture. It's something that I still negotiate and deal with every day na I don't understand. Pa rin, sometimes na scripture really has all the answers.
Yeah.
And the reason why sometimes we feel like we are lost in our 20s, our 30s, we have those quarter life, midlife crisis, is because our maps got it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I was having this conversation a few years ago with a friend of mine. A study came out where scientists found out that resting once a week actually has incredible health benefits for people. And I was telling this person, it's so interesting how many of the sound bites that we hear that are quite inspirational,
Yes.
that are good, that are right, that sound kind of right. If you study scripture, that's really where it comes from.
Yes.
Generosity, forgiveness, grace, prioritizing love over bitterness. These are things that are rooted in scripture talaga. And what a great way to discuss that, right? Na, totoo nga, it's a map. And I like what you said na in our 20s, the reason why we feel lost is because we follow the wrong worldview, a worldview that eventually leads to destruction. So I want to ask you before we move on to the rest of the questions here, how do you differentiate a good worldview from a bad worldview? Because if you're a young person watching this, of course we're Christians, diba? So we can say this for ourselves, but they're trying to figure it out. Which worldview do I map my life out from? How do they differentiate that? What are the questions that they can ask themselves?
Yeah. So a good worldview or a bad worldview. I would say a bad worldview is something that hurts yourself and usually hurts others. Sometimes we don't see that in our 20s. Sabi nga nila, our brains are not fully developed
Until you're 25.
Yes, until you're 25. But you realize that there are really manifestly harmful worldviews, especially those that involve, to be honest, those highly individualistic worldviews.
That's a really good one.
Because even secular studies tell you that, man is really made to socialize.
Yeah.
And we are placed here on earth to, form social connections. And removing yourself from society intentionally. That can lead to mental health problems. That can also lead to self-destructive behaviors. So yeah, that's something that we should be wary of because again, in this post-truth narrative, in this Gen Z narrative that um that's highly individualistic, it can really be harmful. And you see that from a mile away sometimes. And I think what a good worldview is one that is prefaced on love. And it's
Mm.
so cheesy to say that, but even us as Christians, we know that if a worldview is primed or is prefaced with love, you know that you are in the right place. You
Mm.
know that it's coming from something that is inherently good
Yeah.
rather than something na okay, I think caution muna to the wind. I think your thoughts, your views do not align with mine. Rather, when someone comes to you
Mm.
with love, with understanding, with patience, all of these things, you know, that's a worldview that's prefaced with good.
Hmm. I like that. Okay, so as Christians, we will definitely encounter people who don't share the same
Yeah,
worldview. Why do you think it's important that we learn about other people's worldviews and as you mentioned, approach it with love, with patience, with grace, rather than come out and judge them or shut them down?
yeah. Because we've discussed this earlier. I think sometimes some Christians think that other people do not have worldviews or do not even have a high regard for other people's worldviews.
Mm.
Sometimes we come into conversations with people that we want to share the gospel with, and we come out guns a-blazing, for the lack of better term. Na parang, this is what I think is right. I
Yeah.
think your life is spiraling. I don't agree with your lifestyle. And this is what I want for you to happen.
Yeah.
Aminin natin, sometimes that's how we come across conversations, especially with someone that we care about
Yeah.
deeply. And sometimes we feel like we need to fix my friend. I need to fix my friend.
What's wrong with that
What's
attorney? Charing.
parang I need to fix people in my life.
Yeah.
We come out guns a blazing, but sometimes that actually turns them off. That
Yeah.
actually pushes them away. So it's important to approach people with an understanding of their worldview because again, let's go always go back to that. Lahat tayo, everyone has a worldview.
Mm.
Everyone has a morality in their heads.
Yeah.
No matter what you think about it, no matter how much you disagree with it,
Mm-hmm.
um, everyone has that. And I think the key to reaching out to them is first to gain an understanding of where they're coming from. Sobrang cliche niya, but it really is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, Approaching someone and trying to understand their worldview is not us trying to subscribe to their worldview, but us trying to, again, preface things with love.
Yeah. Build a
Because
bridge.
build the bridge. We cannot always come forward with, "Hey, I want to fix what's wrong with you," because that is not our job. I think this generation sometimes is fixated with that. Na it's me not being a good friend if I
Yeah.
do not save my friend from destruction. Well, well-meaning and good intentions sometimes, pero let's face it, this generation is also very different.
That's so
Yes.
true. One of the things that shocked me recently that I learned from my husband, kasi very different personalities kami.
Yeah.
So my husband tends to be the more compassionate and gentle
Yeah.
type of person. Bakit ka nag-a-agree, attorney? Hindi, pero ganun talaga yung
No, no,
personality
no,
niya.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yung
Yeah,
vibes
yeah.
niya
Yung
parang
vibes
ganun
niya,
eh.
ganun siya, diba? Ako, I'm very straightforward, as you can see. And I remember he was asked a difficult question in church, and he started it off with, as Christians, we are known more about what we don't approve of than what we actually believe in. And I was so convicted when he said that, na hindi siya kaagad dun sa correction eh. He's like, why are we thinking about the correction kaagad when we should be encouraging first about
Yeah.
truth? That's the first one. And then the second thing that I learned from him recently, he said, you don't correct kaagad, you shepherd their hearts. Ang ganda ng term, you shepherd their hearts so that they can build their own convictions.
Yes.
And that's so important to what you were saying. That's what building a bridge looks like. It's not correcting kaagad and saying that you're living your life in a way that will lead you to destruction. It's building that bridge. telling them this is what I believe in, this is, this is the truth, this is the scriptures, and kind of shepherding their hearts so that they can build their own
Yeah.
convictions.
And going back to how Christ himself did his ministry,
Mm.
he did a lot of listening and he did a lot of going. When I mean going, he
Mm.
literally went to where
That's
the
true.
people were. He wouldn't meet his disciples kung hindi siya pumunta dun sa their boats.
Mm.
He wouldn't be able to also minister to the Samaritan woman without meeting her where she was and without
Mm.
listening to her narrative. Even though, oh man, he's Christ, he
Wasn't
already
that the
knew.
longest conversation that Jesus had about with the
Exactly.
Samaritan woman?
Exactly. And kitang-kita mo doon na
Or sorry, with the woman at the well
with
pala
a woman at the
yun.
well,
Yeah.
yeah. And he had an understanding of Samaritan culture. He
Mm.
was prefaced with an understanding of that. Kumbaga, he was equipped when he went into that conversation.
Yeah.
He didn't come out guns a-blazing, but he
Mm.
he initiated a conversation. In fact, bridges and the way that Christ did his ministries are example of how we should be
Yeah.
doing these things. I always for me, ang best example, and I would argue that this is the best example of how Christ did his ministry, and I think it's underrated. Yung pag dining niya with sinners.
Mm.
And why is that important to me? 'Cause scripture doesn't really expound on how those meals went.
Mhm.
But let's bring it to the level of our everyday activities. Dining with someone is one of the most vulnerable things you can do as a person.
Yeah.
Offering your time and then unguarded ka usually on your meal times. That's where a person is, kumbaga laid back or
Yeah.
chill. Having those kinds of conversations over meals, people remember that.
Yeah.
Tumatatak sa tao yon. And your vulnerability is shown when you offer someone a meal, when you pay for their meal even sometimes,
Mm.
or even when you just break bread with them. And, that's how Christ did his ministry. He went to them. He had conversations with them. And, you know what? This generation sometimes, ang hinihingi lang nila in the midst of their confusion over their lives or their worldviews, and sometimes they just need someone to listen to.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes we talk over them.
Mm.
We talk first without listening. And that is a worldview that is not congruent with how Christ did his ministry.
That's so
Again, with
true.
the example na he literally just went with meals with them. And sometimes that's all a person needs. Your time, your
Mm.
vulnerability, your effort to go to a dinner with them.
Yeah. Recently, that's a really great point, by the way. And I think you're right. It's so underrated because we always see the big things that Jesus did, right? Which are also wonderful. The
Yeah.
miracles, being raised from the dead, all of these big things. But it's so true because I'm reading this book currently by Philip Yancey, The Jesus I Never Knew.
Yeah.
And at some point, I was crying while reading this book because Philip Yancey was painting the picture of who Jesus was as a person, as a human when he took on flesh. And it made me so emotional to think about how the God of the universe took on flesh. Like, yung may sinusulat dun si Philip Yancey na, imagine he chose the time in which he will be born, the place where he will be born, the historical culture in which he will be born, the life that he was going to live it. He knew what was going to happen and he did it anyway.
Yes.
And just to see how Jesus was so compassionate in that aspect, even more so, it really softened my heart that recently, because of the contentious news and everything that's happening online right now with our country and all over the world, I found myself, and I confess this to my husband, I found myself getting really irritated by people who didn't share my worldviews. And I told it to Juancho because I said, I don't want to be like this because this is not how Jesus was. And I remember the first thing that the first thing that I did at that time, by God's grace, is I said the prayer which was, Lord, help me see these people the way that you see them.
Yes.
Yung ganong klaseng compassion, yung ganong klaseng lens that if it were up to me, I'm not that compassionate as a person. But I pray na, Lord, I want to see these people who don't share the same worldview, who don't share the same political views, who don't share the same values that I do, to see them the way that you see them. To a point where you were saying, you were hanging on the cross and saying, forgive them, Father. They don't know what they're doing.
Yes.
I don't have that kind of heart, but I want to. And that's the kind of heart that we have to have for other
Yeah.
people who don't have the same worldview. Because if we don't have that kind of heart, it's gonna be really hard to minister to
We
them.
cannot love like Christ.
Yeah.
Hindi kundi natin yun gagawin. And I think recently I've been learning about, evangelism. The SES app has been very helpful
Mhm.
because there's one of the action points that can be done there, which is to start a faith conversation. And I found it to be very helpful. Starting a conversation about faith. Actually, hindi na nga literally about faith, values.
Mm.
Because worldviews, part of that basket are values.
Yeah.
And again, lahat ng tao also have values. Things that are important to them, they hold dear and drive their behavior. Recently I've been ministering to friends about, love life. Yan, favorite, ano yan, dinner
Yes.
conversation.
Sa Pinoy.
Sa Pinoy, right? Instant fodder for
Mm,
chismis or
yes.
heartbreak,
Mhm.
diba? So I've been doing this with my girlfriend recently, that we've been meeting with our non-Christian friends, sharing a meal with them, quite literally, dinner. So they've asked us questions about our relationship, about heartbreak, because most of them are single. And, we've literally had conversations where the gospel was in full display, because we've seen how questions about heartbreak and relationships, like what keeps our relationship,
Mhm.
kumbaga, going, wala kaming ibang masagot kundi
Yeah.
Christ being at the center. And in that moment, the gospel is being preached, because the standards of the world will not say that. They will
Mhm.
always say that the foundation of our relationship is the letter T word, trust. Pero sa atin, it's the C word, it's Christ, di ba?
Yeah.
And it's a revolutionary concept. But if you say it enough, if you say it in conversations, again, our speech, that is a
Mm.
reflection of our worldview. That's a reflection of our values. And I've seen that it's effective in trying to introduce the gospel in a manner which is, I wouldn't say non-offensive, but in a manner that is loving as well.
Yeah.
Because again, people will just come to you sometimes with questions about life
Yeah.
and, heartbreak, love. And as the Christian friend, minsan naman talaga, out of joy, out of your love for them, kasagutin mo eh.
Mhm.
And we shouldn't shy away from those kinds of conversations. And those are actually opportunities to share the gospel without going from point A to point B. I think that's one thing that the Lord has been impressing me lately, na
Yeah.
it's important to,
Mm.
to teach pa rin the gospel in full or yung presentation.
Mm.
But sometimes you really do not have to be so parang, I forget the term, pero parang so laser focused on going from point A to point B na
Mm.
na-preach ko yung buong gospel message. It can start with conversations about faith.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so cliche, but I remember hearing that the first few years that I became a Christian, which was sometimes ikaw lang yung Bible na makikita nila.
Yes.
And that affected me so much kasi oo nga no, like am I living a life that is based on the Bible, and does it reflect in my decision making, in my action, that people don't even literally have to hear the gospel, but because it's just the way that I live my life, they see it. I trust God, he is my
Yeah.
only hope. I am perpetually joyful, not because of my circumstances, but because of who God is and who I am in him. Then the gospel is already being shown to people. Yes, of course, it's important to share the gospel point A to point Z, right?
Yeah.
But what's even more important is really just modeling that Christ likeness and showing biblical foundations in your own life as well. I remember one of the funny things that our pastor here always talks about is, oh, wag kayong puro aral lang ng aral, baka yung ulo nyo lang mapunta sa heaven. Kasi gino-joke niya palagi na, okay naman yan, sige, mag-reform theology tayo, alamin natin yung eschatology,
Yeah.
gusto niya yan, sige, game. Pero, are the things that you're learning making you more like Christ?
Yes.
That is the question at the end of the day. Do people see you and they say, ay, learned tong taong to? Or, ay, mahal nito si Jesus?
And again, how Christ did his ministry was always love in action. It
Hmm.
wasn't love in theory.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get wrapped up in saying that you love the sinners, you love them, you care for them, pero hindi ka nga pumupunta sa kanila.
Yeah.
Parang minsan we are uncomfortable about being in spaces where we feel like, I don't think anyone's gonna talk to me if I bring up
Mm-hmm.
Christ in the conversation. But again, those are opportunities.
Yeah.
God placed us exactly where we are right now in our work, in our careers, in our school, in our friend groups to be salt and light.
Hmm.
And it cannot be disregarded that, the everyday, the touch and go interactions, those are actually a living testimony.
Yeah, that's true. Attorney, I feel like there are so many things that we can keep discussing on, diba, when it comes to worldview. But as a final note, I wanted to ask you, how do we then balance this? Which is, we have to go deeper into our own worldview so that our foundation is strong, right? So we need to, syempre, learn and live out the Christian worldview, while at the same time balancing that with learning and building a bridge with the other worldviews around us. And why is that important?
Yeah. So it's a difficult balance. I would put that right off the bat na it's so difficult to be a Christian in these times. And I think that needs to be verbalized.
Mm-hmm.
Na being a Christian and being, salt and light and doing love in action, it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
And the first thing is acknowledging that and asking help from God. Na, Lord, aside from me choosing to follow you and take up your cross daily and following you, it's also praying that, Lord, I need to be salt and light to other people. And I don't know how to do that. I think it starts with that. It starts with humility.
Yeah.
Again, the reason why sometimes people come off as aggressive or sometimes people come off as, yan na naman yung Christian na gusto kong ayusin, is because
Mm.
kulang din tayo ng humility. We sometimes forget that it's the Holy Spirit that actually drives these conversations
Yeah.
or even brings these conversations into light. Because as I said, labanan na ngayon din ng conversation. Labanan na rin ng presentation of values and things that you hold dear. And sometimes these never come into light if you're not in touch with Him
Yeah.
in the first place. And that comes with a lot of humility. Um, Again, there's also be premium with knowing exactly where God placed you,
Mm.
and not denying yourself of the opportunity to get in touch with these people. Why am I saying that? Some people kasi are so comfortable being in a church atmosphere
Mm.
that they feel like if they step out of the church, feeling nila the world is already out to get them and mababahiran ako, for the lack of a better term. But again, the reason why you have work, which is outside of
Yeah.
church, the reason why you have non-Christian friends is because that is your mission field.
Yeah, and that's why we're commanded to be salt and light. How can you be
Yes.
salt and light
Yes.
together? Para-paras tayong salt and light.
Pero ang hirap kasi, lalo na, kids like me, pastors' kids or people who
Yeah.
grew up in church, natatakot eh. Na parang, yun nga, mababahiran ako if I step out of that. And again, that even comes with even more humility. And dun ko ipe-preface dun ko ilalagay yung balance. It's coming to the Lord with that kind of humility. Na, Lord, use me as your servant in order to minister to others. I know it's difficult. I know it's not something that I can do out of my own will, out of my own power, but only by your grace.
Yeah.
It really starts with that. Because it's easier said than done what I said about dining with people, dining with sinners, and reaching out to them and starting a faith conversation. It is intimidating. It is going to be scary. There are times where it can get aggressive.
Mm.
But again, there really is no further help that you can get but from God Himself.
Mm.
Tap into His love, tap into His grace, and ako, I always say this, and in the conversation, it's always been the parang the recurring theme. Balik ka lang sa Matthew, balik ka sa Mark, sa Luke. How did Christ do His ministry?
Yeah.
Balik ka. The examples there are very, very, they're all laid out for us. Preface everything with love. Always, always preface everything with love.
Mm. I love that. Ganda. Alam nyo na, guys. It's
Soundbite.
easier said
Than
than
done,
done,
yes.
though. Thanks, attorney, ha?
Yes, yes.
No, but it's really good practical tips,
Yeah.
right? So the practical tip is really just humility first and foremost.
Yes.
It's that prayerful humility of knowing your starting point, which is, Lord, it is only by your grace and by your mercy that I am here. It is your calling that I have been placed in this particular field, work, community, or family, and I trust you in that. that kind of prayerful humility is always going to be the needed starting point for us as Christians. And the practical tip of just reaching out to people who might not have the same worldviews as you, maybe even anticipating that it might be an antagonistic kind of
Yes.
conversation, while at the same time acknowledging that I stand firm on this foundation and I come with humility, with respect, with grace, and with love for this person,
And we always have a model because he
Mm,
loved us first.
yeah.
So ako, if you are stuck or parang you're scared of going that first step of sharing the gospel, or even not just sharing the gospel, sharing your worldviews pa nga lang eh.
Yeah.
What you believe in pa nga lang eh. Remember, our model is always Christ. We know how to love. Marunong
Mhm.
tayo magmahal in Filipino. Marunong tayo magmahal dahil minahal niya muna tayo. And that will
Mm,
always be our model. That will always be our moral compass, the real moral compass in
mm.
how the way that we share the gospel. If you're stuck, you always go back to the example of Christ.
I love that. Thank you so much, Attorney Arrow,
Thank
for
you.
being on the podcast. I loved your insights and I loved our shared love for the Lord and for His Word. And I hope that this was a conversation that a lot of young people can really benefit from. Even yung mga young at heart lang, katulad namin ni Attorney.
Let's go.
Nag-randomly quote ng emo songs.
We've all been there.
Yeah, we've all been there. We know the song. Kung sumabay kayo sa amin, wag na po kayo magpanggap. But thank you so much for being on this episode of Adulting with Joyce Pring. If you guys enjoy this, please do download also the Yes He Is app that Attorney mentioned earlier. It's for free on all of the app stores. Download it and let's make Jesus known together. Please do let us know if you love this episode of Adulting with Joyce Pring, and we'll see you on the next one. Paalam!